She was shamed in front of everyone. But the truth, without her, that church would not even exist. Angela Morris pressed her hand against the heavy oak door of St. Gabriel's Church. It was early Sunday morning, and the city streets behind her were still quiet, broken only by the sound of birds calling from the few scattered trees that lined the sidewalks. Angela's heart pounded, as if she were about to walk into a courtroom instead of a sanctuary. For years, she had passed this church on her way to work. For years, she had admired the way sunlight painted colors through the tall stained glass windows. But this morning she decided she could no longer just admire from the outside. She wanted to step in, sit in the pews, and pray under the roof she had silently fought to protect. Her dress was plain, navy blue cotton that had faded from too many washes. The heels of her shoes were scuffed, and her small purse was nothing more than a gift from a thrift store. Inside it, she carried her Bible, a folded handkerchief, and an old photograph of her mother, who had died when Angela was only 19. Her mother had always spoken of the power of faith, of walking boldly into places where others might not welcome you. That memory gave Angela the courage to push open the door. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of wax from candles that had burned the night before. Sunlight poured through the stained glass and painted patches of red, blue, and gold across the stone floor. Angela stepped carefully, her heels clicking softly against the ground. She felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. For once, she allowed herself to rest. She chose a pew near the back, lowered her head, and whispered a prayer. "Lord, I am tired, but I thank you for strength. Thank you for guiding me here." The choir rehearsed somewhere deeper in the church, their voices floating in gentle harmony. For a moment, Angela's heavy heart felt light. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. Then she sensed a presence. A shadow stretched across her pew. She opened her eyes and looked up. Standing before her was a tall woman with sharp features, silver-streaked hair, and a pearl necklace that glittered in the colored light. The woman's cream-colored coat looked as though it had never been worn twice. Her lips were painted a bold shade of red. Her eyes filled with the cold confidence of someone who had never worried about bills or meals. "You should not be sitting here," the woman said, her voice slicing through the quiet. Angela blinked. "I beg your pardon. This section is for families who have been part of this church for generations." The woman continued, "People like you should know their place." Angela's chest tightened. She had heard words like that before, in schools, in stores, even at jobs, where she scrubbed floors while others walked past her as if she were invisible. But to hear them here, in a place she had helped preserve, was sharper than any other wound. "I came here to pray," Angela said softly. The woman frowned, her eyes narrowing. "Pray somewhere else. You look like one of the workers. The cleaning staff, perhaps. If you are here to clean, then do it. But if not, I suggest you leave. We do not want mistakes like last week." Dust was left on the altar. People like you always forget the details. Angela's mouth went dry. She had never cleaned this church. This was her very first time inside. But here she was, accused, dismissed, and disrespected without question. Her fingers gripped her Bible tighter. 1,000 words rose in her throat, but none escaped. Her mother's photograph inside her purse seemed to whisper patience. Still, the humiliation cut deep. The woman gestured toward the exit. "Go on now. This is not your place." Angela stood slowly, dignity trembling inside her chest. She wanted to scream that this church existed only because of her sacrifice, because of the savings she had poured into its walls when everyone else turned away. But she stayed silent. She walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the hollow hall. No one stopped her. No one asked what had happened. The choir kept singing. The sunlight kept glowing. And life in St. Gabriel's went on as if nothing had happened. But the truth was this: years ago, when the city threatened to shut down this church and sell the land to developers, it was Angela who donated nearly everything she had. She had worked night shifts, cleaning offices, mopping classrooms, and scrubbing kitchens to gather those savings. She had given it quietly, with no thought of recognition, only to honor her mother's dream. And now, in the very place she had saved, she was treated as though she were nothing. Angela stepped outside. The church doors closed behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her out. She sat down on the cool stone steps, pressing her Bible against her chest. The words of the woman still rang in her ears. People like you should know their place. She tilted her head back and looked at the cross that rose above the roof. It gleamed against the pale sky. Lord, she whispered, you know my heart. You know what I gave for this place? Please give me strength. A few churchgoers passed by, greeting one another warmly as they left the building. Some nodded politely at Angela, but none stopped to ask why she sat alone. To them, she was simply another face, perhaps a worker, perhaps a visitor, invisible, unimportant. Inside, the wealthy woman, Mrs. Whitmore, had joined a circle of parishioners. Her voice carried easily through the hall, polished and sharp. The place must be kept in order, she declared. We cannot allow standards to slip. Some people simply do not belong in houses of worship. Her words spread like smoke. Those who heard them whispered to one another. No one questioned her authority. No one asked about the woman she had just cast out. Silence gave weight to her cruelty. Angela rose from the steps, her legs heavy. The memory of her long years of labor weighed on her. Nights spent scrubbing floors while her back ached. Days spent saving coins while others enjoyed luxuries. She remembered the moment when she first heard the church was about to be sold. She had gone to the city office, trembling as she signed the papers, handing over nearly all her savings to protect this sacred place. No one else had stepped forward. She alone had carried that burden, and now the very church she had saved seemed to have no place for her. She walked slowly down the sidewalk. Her eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Part of her wanted to never return, to let St. Gabriel's belong to those who thought themselves worthy. But deep inside, another voice rose. A voice that told her she was meant to stand, not to run. The humiliation had cut deep, but it also awakened something she had long kept buried. A quiet fire, a sense that one day the truth would be revealed. And when it was, those who had looked down on her would see her not as a shadow, but as the pillar that had held the church upright. Angela turned one last time to look at St. Gabriel's glowing in the morning light. This story isn't finished, she whispered to herself. Angela's small apartment sat on the east side of the city, tucked into an aging building, where peeling paint lined the stairwell and the hum of broken fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, her body still weighed down by the morning's humiliation. Inside, the air was heavy with the faint scent of bleach and detergent from the laundry she had done the night before. Her space was modest: a couch with worn cushions, a second-hand dining table, and a single bookshelf filled with her mother's old devotionals and a few framed photographs. She set her Bible down gently, then lowered herself into the chair by the table. For a long moment she sat still, staring at nothing. The words of Mrs. Whitmore replayed in her mind like a cruel song. You should know your place. Pray somewhere else. People like you always forget the details. Angela exhaled slowly, closing her eyes. She had spent most of her life swallowing such insults, telling herself that her worth was not defined by the judgment of others. But this time felt different. This was not just any building where she had been dismissed. This was St. Gabriel's, the place her mother had once spoken of with hope. the place Angela had given everything to save. Finally, she rose and crossed to the narrow bed pressed against the wall. She knelt down, reaching beneath it until her fingers touched the worn leather folder she kept hidden there. She pulled it out carefully, as if handling something sacred. The folder held only a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges but still clear. It was the official receipt from the city office, dated nearly a decade earlier. Angela's name was written in bold ink, Angela Morris. Below it, the amount she had donated. A sum so staggering, it still made her chest tighten every time she read it. It was more than most people in her neighborhood would see in 5 years of work. She remembered the day clearly. Her hands had trembled as she slid the envelope of money across the desk. The clerk had looked at her with surprise, even suspicion. "Are you sure?" he had asked. Angela had only nodded. She was sure. Her mother's dream of keeping St. Gabriel's alive had burned stronger than her own need for comfort or security. Angela traced the faded signature at the bottom of the page. She had never told anyone. Not her coworkers who laughed with her on lunch breaks. Not the cousins who sometimes called to borrow money. Not even her best friend, who always insisted she deserved to enjoy life instead of saving for something she would never use. Angela had kept the secret between herself and God. But now, after the humiliation she had faced, she wondered if that silence had been a mistake. She folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the folder. Her hands trembled, not with weakness, but with a strange kind of resolve. Maybe it was time for the truth to come forward. Maybe it was time to show those who dismissed her that their assumptions had blinded them to the very person who had kept their sacred building standing. For years, she had believed humility meant silence. Now she began to see that humility did not mean erasing yourself. It meant standing with dignity, even when others tried to push you aside. Angela placed the folder on the table and whispered to the quiet room. Maybe it's time they know. The following Sunday, Angela returned to St. Gabriel's. She dressed the same as before, in her simple navy dress, but this time she carried a deeper strength in her chest. She walked through the tall doors with calm, even though her heart still beat quickly. She expected the stares, the whispers. She expected to see Mrs. Whitmore waiting with her cold disapproval, but instead, she found kindness. As the choir finished their last hymn and people began to file out, a woman approached Angela. She was older, with silver curls tucked under a neat hat and warm eyes that carried both wisdom and sorrow. Her name was Grace, a longtime member of the church. "My dear," Grace said softly, placing a gentle hand on Angela's arm. "I saw what happened last week. That woman. She is known for her arrogance. Don't let her break you." Angela lowered her gaze. "I came only to pray. Yet she made me feel like I had no right to sit here, as if my presence was an offense." Grace shook her head. "Her family may have money, yes, but money does not make one righteous. She confuses wealth with worth. But you, child, you carry something she will never understand. Sacrifice, true sacrifice." Angela felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell Grace everything about the nights she had worked until dawn, about the envelope of money she had handed over in silence, about how St. Gabriel stood today only because of her unseen offering. But she held back. It was not yet time. Instead, she said, "Sacrifice is heavy when it feels invisible." Grace squeezed her hand. "Invisible to men, perhaps, but never invisible to God. And one day, what is hidden will be revealed." Angela nodded slowly, her eyes moist. Grace's words touched a place in her heart that had begun to harden. For the first time since the insult, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe her silence had meaning after all. Maybe her story would find its moment. As she left the church that day, Angela carried Grace's words with her. One day, What is hidden will be revealed. The phrase echoed in her chest, growing stronger with every step. The third Sunday came, and Angela decided she would no longer hide at the back of the church. She arrived early, before most of the congregation, and chose a seat closer to the front. The sanctuary was quiet, lit only by shafts of light breaking through the colored glass. Angela knelt at the altar, whispering prayers for strength. The sound of heels clicking against marble broke the silence. Angela looked up slowly. Mrs. Whitmore was approaching, her pearl necklace gleaming. Her lips curled into a sharp smile that held no warmth. "You again," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I thought I made myself clear. This place has standards. Standards that you do not meet." Angela rose to her feet, holding her Bible against her chest. Her voice was calm but steady. "I came to pray. That is all." Mrs. Whitmore scoffed. "Pray somewhere else. We don't need charity cases lowering the dignity of this church. This is a house of order, not pity." The sanctuary seemed to grow colder. Angela's hands trembled slightly, but she did not back away. For too long, she had allowed herself to shrink under the weight of such words. "Not today." "You believe this place belongs to you," Angela said quietly. "You believe your name gives you power here, but you don't know the whole story." Mrs. Whitmore blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time. "And what story would that be?" Angela looked her straight in the eyes. "The story that this church still stands because someone gave everything when no one else would. The story that sacrifice built these walls, not arrogance. And the truth will not stay hidden forever." The words hung in the air like thunder. For the first time, Mrs. Whitmore did not have a sharp reply. Her eyes narrowed, but her mouth stayed shut. Angela turned, walking down the aisle with her Bible held tightly. Her footsteps echoed, not in shame this time, but in resolve. She knew the time was coming when the truth would break open, and when it did, no one would ever dismiss her again. Angela arrived at the church 2 days later, her heart heavier than the worn leather bag she carried. The evening air was crisp, and the last rays of sun painted the stained glass. Windows in soft hues of red and gold. Inside the church, the atmosphere was tense. The council had gathered 4 older men, 2 women, and Mrs. Whitmore, sitting in her usual seat with a posture that radiated superiority. Pastor Reed cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss an incident that occurred last Sunday," he began. His eyes shifted toward Angela with a mixture of discomfort and sympathy. There was a disagreement in the sanctuary. Angela stayed quiet, hands folded in her lap. She noticed how Mrs. Whitmore crossed her arms, already prepared to dominate the discussion. Mrs. Whitmore spoke first. "The issue is quite clear. This woman," she gestured dismissively at Angela, "was assigned simple cleaning duties. Yet she failed to maintain order. Her neglect was obvious, and it disrupted the sanctity of the service. I asked her to leave because her presence only reminded everyone of that failure." Angela felt a sting at the word "this woman," as if her identity was not even worth acknowledging. She inhaled deeply. "With all due respect," she said slowly, "no one was disrupted. People still prayed. People still worshipped. If a chair out of place or a floor unpolished disturbed faith, then maybe the problem is not the floor, but the heart." A silence fell. Some council members looked down, unwilling to meet Angela's gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in her words. Mrs. Whitmore scoffed. "This is exactly the problem. Instead of humility, we get lectures. Churches thrive on order, not excuses." Angela wanted to reveal her secret right then. To tell them she was the one who had donated the very land they stood on. But something stopped her. It wasn't pride, which was clarity. If she revealed it in anger, it would seem like she wanted recognition. Instead, she bit her tongue and allowed the moment to pass. The meeting ended with no resolution. Pastor Reed simply said, "We will revisit this in time." Angela left quietly, her dignity intact, but her spirit bruised once again. Later that week, Angela sat at her small wooden table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. The lamp beside her flickered faintly, casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. She picked up her pen and began to write. "Dear Pastor Reed, I have watched this church grow from its foundation. I have listened to voices lifted in song, prayers whispered in darkness, and laughter echo in fellowship halls. What no one knows is that these walls stand because of a silent gift made many years ago. That gift came from me. I never sought recognition. I gave because I believed God's house should welcome all, regardless of status or skin. But in recent days, I have been reminded that silence can sometimes enable cruelty. Disrespect has been masked as discipline, and judgment has been mistaken for righteousness. I cannot carry this truth in secret any longer. The land you stand on, the very ground beneath our feet, was donated by me, not to elevate myself, but to remind this community that we are all equal in God's eyes. With hope, Angela Lewis." Tears blurred her handwriting by the time she signed her name. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and decided she would hand it directly to Pastor Reed on Sunday morning. Sunday arrived with heavy skies. Angela entered the church, her heart pounding like a drum. She carried the letter in her purse, her fingers brushing against it every few minutes for courage. As the service ended, Pastor Reed announced, "Before we dismiss, a matter of importance has been brought to my attention." His voice was calm but steady. He pulled the letter from his pocket. The congregation shifted, whispering among themselves. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, suspicious. Pastor Reed read Angela's words aloud. Each sentence echoed through the sanctuary like a quiet thunder. Gasps erupted when the truth unfolded. The church land had been donated by Angela Lewis, the woman so often overlooked, dismissed, and ridiculed. Angela sat still, her face calm, though her heart trembled. The room was filled with murmurs, some shocked, some ashamed. When the pastor finished, silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. Then he spoke again. "We owe this woman not only gratitude, but respect. She gave without seeking credit. She served even when others questioned her worth. If this is not Christ-like humility, then what is?" Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed. For once, her words failed her. She looked down, unable to meet Angela's eyes. After the service, people surrounded Angela. Some hugged her with tears, others whispered apologies. Grace clung to her side, beaming with pride. Angela accepted their gestures, but she spoke with calm firmness. "I did not give this land for thanks. I gave it because I believed in what this church could be. What matters is how we treat one another, not who owns what. If my silence caused you to forget that, then let this truth remind you forever." Her words struck deeper than any sermon. Even the council members, usually silent and cautious, approached her with sincerity. One said softly, "We failed you, Angela, but you reminded us who we are meant to be." For the first time in years, Angela felt seen not for her gift, but for her courage. Weeks later, Angela walked through the church again. This time, no one avoided her. No one whispered behind her back. Even Mrs. Whitmore, though still proud, had softened. She offered Angela a brief nod, which was as close to an apology as she could manage. Angela stood near the altar, watching Grace dust the pews with care. She smiled, her heart lighter than ever. The church bells rang above, their sound clear and bright against the morning sky. Angela whispered to herself, "Respect isn't about recognition. It's about seeing each other as equals." She walked away, knowing her silence had once allowed her dignity to be questioned. But her voice had restored not just her own worth, but the soul of the church. Its moral lesson of the story is that true worth is not measured by titles or wealth, but by humility and the courage to stand for dignity. When respect is denied, truth has the power to restore it. Tell us in the comments section what you learned from this story. Like and subscribe the channel for more interesting videos.